Hello, and welcome to the Pixel Perspective podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Adrian, alongside my good buddy and co-host, JJ. How you doing, JJ?
Not too bad, man. What's going on?
Oh, not much. And if you're watching the video portion, you can see we have a special guest. We have with us Stephan Reese, also known as Art of Nintendo Power on Twitter. Stephan, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. It's been a hell of a week, but it's Friday.
Yeah,
so
Friday's good. Yeah,
I'm very, very pleased.
Man, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today on this episode. I am very excited.
Yeah.
So we've got some interview questions to bounce off of Stephan here, because if you don't know, Stephan collects the Art of Nintendo Power, which is basically original art pieces from the Nintendo Power magazine. And he tracks down some really incredible cover pieces for the magazine that are one of a kind. And it's really awesome and unique. So I really want to talk to you about that. And
yeah, sure.
Just get your perspective. But before we get into that, I want to know, like, how did you get into collecting originally? Like, what are your earliest memories of being a collector?
I'll tell you, I mean, I had a shoebox collection like any other kid, right? Like my actual like original video games. And it kind of stayed that way for a while. I sold off most of my games at yard sales over the years, that kind of thing. But you know, there was always that, I think every kid had that, like, oh, I wonder what it would be like to have every Nintendo game. Like literally, I think every one of us has had that thought at one point or another, usually when we were like in about fourth grade, I would say.
Or last week.
Last week. But that was, you know, that was kind of a fleeting thing, whatever. And so actually this is my 18th year working in the video game industry. And so that actually sort of kept me away from collecting, I think, for a while, because it's difficult. And I find this with artists too, when I talk to them about it, it's difficult to like assign value to your art form, like whatever that is, right? And so like, I'd look at like games and like, you know, I think back at like all the like crazy like prototypes and hardware and all that stuff that just sat on my desk at work, right? Looking back, and I think it was like I was uninterested in collecting a lot of that stuff, I think, because I was I was in the thick of it, right? That's what I did for a living.
Right.
But so it actually, I used to collect Ninja Turtles as hardcore as I collected games and art and all that kind of stuff. Now I was very well known for my collections, and you know, Kevin Eastman was the best man at my wedding. Like, wow. I was real into Ninja Turtles.
That is awesome.
And so I had gotten to the point, and this was before the Nickelodeon buyout of the Ninja Turtles. I swear this is gonna come back around to games. But it was before the Nickelodeon buyout. So like, I was collecting when like sort of nobody cared about the Turtles, or less people cared about the Turtles. They weren't
early 2000s.
Yeah, and they weren't putting through any like new product and that kind of thing. And like you could like, getting every Ninja Turtles toy was an attainable thing. Getting every Ninja Turtles comic book was an attainable thing. And I had sort of gotten to that point where I had not just everything I wanted, but just everything. and so every comic published, every variant of every comic published, every variant of every action figure, and wow. I was just like, I hit the definition of done. And I find like a lot of times when you get to that point in collections, it's sort of like you start asking very introspective questions like, does this collection define me? And what would I be without this collection? And those kinds of things start to like permeate your brain. And So I was having the, I was standing in my toy room, which was actually my kitchen. I was a bachelor. I owned no dishes. So I took all the doors. I'll send you guys a picture, but I took all the doors off of my kitchen cabinets and I displayed my collection in the kitchen.
Oh man,
That's fantastic.
that is.
Yeah. And so anyway, so I'd gotten to this point where I was having this like really sort of a crisis around that collection. But at the same time, my wife was diagnosed with cancer. My now late wife was diagnosed with cancer. And so it was like this perfect storm of like, I had this collection, which at the time was like worth, I mean, because we're talking about like very high grade first edition Ninja Turtles #1. And like there was a lot of equity tied up in this collection. So I had this piggy bank essentially that like I didn't really care that much about. Yeah. And at the same time, I was looking for like something to distract me from cancer essentially. And so I really want, and I knew, I knew the obsession of collecting, right? I knew like that could definitely like scratch that itch. Like that would be a helpful cathartic thing for me to have something to do like that. And for whatever reason, like in crept that thought from 4th grade of, I wonder what it would be like to have every Nintendo game. So that's what I started to do. I started, I want to say small. I started slowly liquidating the Turtles collection. I sold one thing. It was a really big thing. It was actually the first sketch of the Shredder, like the first sketch of the Shredder.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna sell this thing, and I'm gonna wait for like 3 months, and I'm gonna see how it feels.
Yeah.
And then I'll sell something else and see how it feels. And lo and behold, it was fine. Even today, like it's been many years now, but even today, there's like a couple like, oh man, I wish I still had that kind of thing. But no regrets, on a broad spectrum. And so I basically liquidated one collection and started funneling that money into it started as collecting Super Nintendo games. I decided Super Nintendo is my favorite console of all time. All but 1 or 2 of my favorite games of all time are on that console. So I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get every Super Nintendo game ever made. And I did in 2.5 months.
Oh my God.
I was out there and I did this like, okay, maybe like the top like 5%. So like, your Speed Racer combo carts and the competition carts and stuff like that. I pulled the trigger on eBay, but like 95% of that, I was just like I live in Southern California. You can't throw a rock without hitting a retro store. So I ran a circuit. I had a circuit that I was just hitting every day. I would be in a different game store and I would just buy whatever they didn't have. And it took 2.5 months to put together the North American Super Nintendo set.
That's insane.
And I looked at that and I'm like, oh my God, this is what I need. This is awesome. And so I was like, all right, like there's so many video games. What's next? And I ended up doing 12 North American sets.
Wow.
Back there, you can see behind that painting. That's actually, or the frame right there. That's CIB 3DO. That's every North American 3DO game.
I was literally just about to say, was 3DO next? Is that what?
Yeah. It wasn't next. NES was next. But yeah, so I started out collecting sets of games. That was my thing. I was just wanted to build sets because it was like something attainable, but yet like really almost infinite that I could just like continue to do. And I love the hunt and like, so I kept doing these sets and I kept, and like off on the side, like my wife was continuing to progress. Right. And so like this was something that I needed to stay engaged with. And I was like primary caretaker for her. And it was, it was a second full-time job. And so I was like, okay, like I came to this realization that I almost was loving the hunt more than I was loving the games. Cause like I was no like stranger to emulation or anything like that. I worked in the game industry. Like I know how to play old games if I want to play old games. And so I found myself loving the hunt for things more than I loved really like having the things. And so especially with like the sets of games that were, they were, mass produced, and there's plenty of people with like lots of video games. It's not like a unique thing. And so I was just like, okay, so what's harder? Because I was like, I just want it to be harder because games, collecting massive amounts of games, I found to be expensive but not difficult. In general, right? If you want to like go on eBay and pull all your triggers, go on Heritage, pull all your triggers, you can meet your goals as far as massing amounts of games fairly easily. Not difficult, just expensive. So I said, okay, so what's difficult? And then I started collecting point of sale displays, and you see like the statues behind me, and there's like the fiber signs that are up there, and that's 4 World of Nintendo cabinets lining this wall, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that I was like, okay, like, so what's harder? And displays were harder. And so I kind of got all that stuff that I wanted to. And I was like, okay, so what's next? And as I was looking for like whatever was next, I was flipping through an issue of Nintendo Power #1. And if you open Nintendo Power #1, the first thing you see is an ad for the gameplay counselor hotline, the power line. And there's like these kids in gameplay counselor jackets checking out the magazine, like sitting on a couch or something. And I was like, I wonder if those jackets exist. Like, I wonder if that's a thing that I can find. And so I started reaching out to gameplay counselors en masse, and almost immediately I found like, yes, those jackets existed, and I have a number of them now. But it was more of the conversation of them saying like, oh, well, I don't have my jacket, but I have this thing and this thing and this random thing. And here's this soon enough, I was finding like, you know how any office job, right? If you've ever had any office job, when you inevitably leave that office job, you take all the shit that's on your desk and you put it into a box, and then you put that box in the garage and you leave it alone for the rest of your life, right? I think we all have that box,
branded mugs and random crap.
Shit that you would want on your desk at that job, but like branded employee shit or like whatever, and that box stays in your garage for the rest of your life. So essentially I started hunting for those boxes, and I was just like, hey, do you still have, like, pointedly asking, do you still have the box of stuff that you left Nintendo with? And a lot of times they said, yeah. And so I was like, awesome. So like, then I started building this like crazy, like gameplay counselor archive. It was way more than just a collection, because at this point I had like half off coupons from like local restaurants, and like this like, I tell people all the time that I collect garbage because it's like half of it's true, like, but like receipts like from the Nintendo store when they bought Chrono Trigger or like whatever, like I was building this really like impressive collection of just like stuff that doesn't necessarily have like monetary value, but just like I was relatively sure that like this was the only existing copy of this, or like here's like a personalized postcard from one gameplay counselor to another, or like this is the time I met Miyamoto and here's the photo, and like these are like just random shit that was just like really like would radiate history, like JJ says, but isn't necessarily of monetary value. So that was actually the first time I decided, you know what, I should do something with this. And so I hooked up with the Video Game History Foundation that did the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, or they did the museum in the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, and they were looking for an exhibit. And so I was like, okay, what if I recreate the workspace of a gameplay counselor?
Oh man. And
so I did. And in Portland, if anyone was at Portland 2019, that was the last convention before the dark times. I did. I created basically everything but the desk that they were sitting on was stuff out of a gameplay counselor's cubicle. The TV, the consoles, the controllers, the prototype cartridges, the shit on the walls. Because again, I took all that stuff that was like, oh, here's half off coupons and little memos and little sketches, doodles that they would like while they were sitting on the phones with kids, that they would just like, I had a whole pads of just like scribbles, and I was just like put that stuff around, and I just made this display. Even the television and the phone that I had was from a counselor's desk. Everything was from a counselor's desk, and that was just the coolest thing I'd ever done in my life. Like I was like, I was like, that really had like galvanized like me into saying like, holy shit, like this is what I want to do with my life. And at honestly that same day, my wife passed away the first day of Portland Retro Gaming Expo. So like it was this like, and she had said to me, like, one of the things, you know, not to get too deep into this because I know it makes everyone uncomfortable but me, but you know, she had said as she was dying, she said, I don't care if I die today, you're still going to that show, because she like knew how important that show was to me.
Wow.
So I ended up leaving her side 3 hours before she died because I had to leave for the show. But that was 100% what she wanted. Like she wanted that for me. So that was like honoring her wish.
That's incredible.
And so all of this as a, you know, as we continue to talk about all these things that I'm doing, it's really honestly part of it is honoring my late wife.
Sure.
And so yeah, that was the coolest thing I'd ever done in my life. And so as I was continuing to kind of amass this gameplay counselor collection, purely by chance, I had ran across a counselor that said, I don't have any of my gameplay counselor stuff left, but when I left gameplay counseling, I went to work for the magazine, Nintendo Power magazine, and I was drawing art for Nintendo Power. I still have some of that. Would you be interested? And like, I like, people talk about like their you know, their brains exploding, like, but that's like the closest thing that of just like the angels ascended from heaven and shone their light upon me, and it was just like I'm in no way
hearing the harps,
but yeah, I was just like, holy shit. Like it had never occurred to me that like that stuff would still exist. You know, it's almost like, you know, when you were a kid, you never thought about the person who was voicing that character that you love.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. It was the same thing. It was like this magazine that was so important to me and to generations of kids. Someone made that, and like the stuff that they used to make that might be out there. Right. And so I was like, hell yeah, I'm interested. And that really kind of started the obsession with Nintendo Power magazine, and the kind of the art of Nintendo Power is that every single piece that I collect for that archive is one of one. Like, as far as scratching that itch of the hunt, right? Like there's literally only one of every single thing that I pick up, right? Like that frame behind me, those are all envelope art from children that
nice.
You know, sent in their envelopes to get published in Nintendo Power magazine. Like I can't, like, it transcended the idea of rarity, where it was just like so that's where I realized I wanted to be. And so I started, you know, hitting the ground, and really it's all networking, right? Like you find one person off of that one person, that first artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, then it's just like, okay, well, who do you know? And who do they know? And who do they know? Because the magazine really poorly credits artists. And so a lot of it is I'm finding these people who, you know, contract artists who no one has known who they are for the last 30 years. And honestly, a lot of them, most of them, 99% of them still want to keep it that way. So, which is why if you look at any of my stuff, I very seldom credit artists by name. And it's not because like, oh, I want to like keep them to myself. It's just that, you know, these people are like retirement age, and they you know, have not been bothered for the last 30 years, are kind of annoyed that I found them to begin with, and don't want to. I always give them the option. I'm like, hey, like, this is, would you like me to put your name out there? And if you do, this is what you can expect. You're going to get, you know, people coming in and wanting to talk to you because you're cool, and like, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And everyone says no, and nobody wants to be bothered by us. But yeah, so that, I mean, that's really how the kind of the hunt, you know, there's no miracles behind it, right? There's no like secret sauce other than I have good soft skills and I'm good at networking and, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, that kind of brings us up to today, really, when I have started a 501c3 nonprofit traveling art museum called the Interactive Art Collection, and that's how Adrian and I met. He designed a logo for me for that foundation, and my kind of flagship display is the Art of Nintendo Power. I have over 350 pieces of original art at this point. And that's not including like production materials, anything like that, like, you know, layouts and like I have faxes back and forth from like the editor of the magazine at the time and the Howard and Nestor artist, and just like, you know, because that's how I mean, you had to fax back and forth back then, right? There was no email,
right?
And so so yeah, I have like all sorts of like stuff like that, like just random production materials, but just art alone, I have over 350 pieces, and again, that's all like one of one. There's only one of each one of those pieces.
That is so cool.
And yeah, so that's and this whole, really the thing that's driving me now is my mission to share this stuff with everyone, because I'm not a basement collector. I've never been a basement collector. Like I'm not like sitting in my cave and like, haha, this is mine and no one shall see it. And like, you know, I'm very well known for dumping, you know, NES prototypes that I found, because, you know, you find other crap like when you never know, and it just behooves me to like, if I find it, I will take it. Like you know, if you're willing to sell it to me, I will buy it from you. And so that just like, so yeah, I've never been one to like to kind of squirrel any of this away. And really now that I have the nonprofit and like really sort of a vehicle to share all of this stuff, that's kind of what I've been doing with my life. And that's, yeah, I think that was the longest possible way I could have taken to answer your question.
You actually answered like several questions that we had along the way. So
that was incredible way to take us through the journey there. I mean, that was great.
I was going to say, because you mentioned like you're good at networking and you're able to find this stuff just through talking to people and kind of like just going out there. But I mean, honestly, like even without that, just the idea of even like thinking about preserving this stuff and finding these one of one pieces, nobody has thought to do that before. But of course, now that like somebody has started to do it, it's kind of like, well, duh, why didn't we? You know, why didn't somebody do that? Because
I
this
will
is
like I say I talk about how open I am with this stuff, and I will admit, at some point, I earlier when I started this, I was a little bit more cagey, a little bit like I didn't talk about it a lot, because like people were kind of like, how the hell are you doing this? And like I knew there was still things out there to find, and so like I was a little bit more tight-lipped at the time. Now I feel like, so here's the thing, and people will call me like selfish, whatever, fine, you can, I don't care, but I know my heart and I know my intentions. I don't know your intentions or your heart, or what, you know, I don't know if you're a basement collector or if you'll want to share things. I don't know if you're buying things to flip, and my part of my mission is to try to centralize these assets as best as I can, so that I can share more compellingly, right? And so yeah, sometimes I am a little bit of a dick as far as like sharing how I do things, or you know, or you know, that kind of thing. But it's because it's very important to me that someone with good intentions winds up with this stuff, and I am the only one that I can know for sure has those intentions.
I was going to say, like, you can call yourself a dick all you want, but you're the guy that literally set up a counselor's corner cubicle to share with the world. So I think none of us doubt your heart, man. Seriously.
Well, I mean, through that story, I have a few other questions, because honestly, man, the way you collect is unique in multitude of different ways. First of all, I mean, you're a completionist. You're talking about like the Ninja Turtles collection, how you had all the different variants of the figures and the comics and all of that. Like, what drives you to be a completionist in that sense? Like wanting to get it all, you know?
I think I'm just very goal driven. And honestly, that's why like the art thing is that like, it's the thing that, so here's the thing. There's no way in hell that I will ever know what art was thrown away or what art is sitting in some attic of some artist that's already passed away, or their kids sold at a yard sale, or finding this stuff is fucking hard. Like I'm not even like I'm not gonna like sugarcoat that at all.
No doubt.
And so I will never have that definition of done with what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Because and I don't know what Nintendo has, and they're not ever going to be forthcoming, let me tell you. So I'm definitely, I love being very goal oriented, and honestly I've just been waiting to find something that the goal is like so lofty, so out there that I could never conceivably finish. And honestly that's been helpful for me. You know, and it's I don't have to, because you know I do, you know, with other things I worry about hitting that definition of done and having those introspective questions of like, well, what do I do now, you know, because like I find a lot, you know, with toys and games and stuff, you'll notice I don't have 8,000 games in this room. I used to. I sold them all to reinvest in the art collection because again, I hit that like, okay, I'm done with the set. And like when you finish something, I find oftentimes, it could be games or toys or whatever, I find that it changes almost instantly from being this like living, growing organism that you are nurturing and you are feeding and you are growing and you're responsible for its well-being. And it feels like this like giant Tamagotchi. But it changes to this weight that's around your neck.
Sure.
Almost instantly, at least for me, almost instantly when you finish, when you hit that definition of done, because you're not growing it anymore. It's not this living, breathing organism. It is this thing that you have completed and is just sitting there now. You know, a few things I've kept, like my Super Nintendo set, I still have. Love Super Nintendo, right? And honestly, like important to my journey too, right? Like that was the catalyst that did a lot, right? My late wife bought me stadium events as a token of appreciation for taking care of her. You know, she had a life insurance policy when she got sick. It paid out. And so like, you know, we bought the house and we did all the responsible adulting things. And then afterwards she had some left over and she said, look, some people would have run. Some people would be less gracious than you. Some people would, you know, she really appreciated that I stayed and that I took care of her. I was her primary caretaker from the day she got sick 4 years later when she died. And so she basically said, I want to get you anything you want, like as a token of my appreciation. What do you want? And it was just one of those things where at the time, Stadium Events was the only game I was missing for my NES set. And I was like, you know, I wonder if there's one on eBay. And sure enough, there was. And I bought it that day.
Wow.
But like that game is very important to me. Not just, I mean, obviously there's like monetary value in Stadium Events, but it could have been, it could have been fucking, you know, Mario Duck Hunt, and it would still be as, you know, precious to me. For that reason. So like there's stuff that I kept, and I like my 3DO set because the 3DO set CIB genuinely difficult. And so there's been some stuff that I kept, but for the most part I dumped that stuff back into the market because again the time is right, let's face it, to dump things back into the market if you want to. And I was able to do a lot for the collection as well, right? So you know,
that is I mean, that answers my question really well. Like I've always been curious, like what drives a person to go to the links that you have for all of your collections, really. And it's that goal oriented focus, you know, and that's not something that, you know, I set small little goals for myself, and that's enough to keep me going. But I don't have like grand goal. Like I don't see an end in sight. Like I don't know where the end point is. So, and I aiming, like you're just going bigger and bigger and bigger. And the thing is, like with your collection, you went from the gameplay counselor, from video games to gameplay counselor stuff to now Nintendo Power. Who's to say what's next? You know, like you collecting this Nintendo Power stuff might lead into something that you hadn't thought about yet. you know,
Sure.
just
I
like
mean,
the
that's
other
entirely
ones.
possible. But like I said, at least for the moment, it's it's definitely like the perfect storm of things that I love, right? Incredibly rare, super, super difficult, and no real end in sight. Like there's a theoretical goal, but there's not like an actual goal that I think I would never be like, whoop, I found the last piece of art. I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next step is collecting actual gameplay counselors.
Well,
There
really,
you go.
honestly, the people joke about that because like I'm gonna like freeze dry Miyamoto. Really, the next step was the nonprofit that was getting out there and like and sharing it and like building a museum. And like I had like the biggest kind of point of validation. So the other day, we're still talking about it, so I don't mention anything. But a major brick and mortar museum contacted me, interested in doing an exhibit. Working with me for a
nice.
Nintendo Power exhibit.
Fantastic.
So not only but was that like a validation of like, yes, like game art is art, but the just like having a museum call me a museum like was such a big thing, right? Because like I don't know, I have imposter syndrome really bad and on everything I do, and it's like I think people who do what they love for a living oftentimes suffer from that, right? Like someone's gonna find out that working in video games isn't a real job. But yeah, so to have that validation of like an actual like storied, like was around in the 1800s, museum, like first of all, call me on the frickin' phone, but then also like talk to me like I knew what I was doing. That's been a big piece of validation for me that happened just recently, actually.
Well, you've got to have a plan in mind for how you want to eventually store this stuff, because I think you might get to a point where it'll probably outgrow your house.
Yeah, I mean, I have basically every wall in the house that's not a wet wall has art on it. But then I also have, honestly, I rotate out just like any other actual museum. Actually, that's actually why that easel is back there, is because I just put something new on it every couple days. And
okay,
but I do that for the whole house. I cycle out the house. So I actually have a guest bedroom that has become the art storage house. And so it's temperature controlled separately, and has a its own dehumidifier and et cetera, and there's just racks in that room, and it's just racks of art.
One of my favorite videos on your YouTube channel is the one where you're just going through the house and showing all the different framed pieces throughout the house. It's really, really cool. And honestly, like if you guys haven't seen this, go check out Stephan's YouTube channel. Is it Art of Nintendo
I'll link
Power?
it down below too.
It is Art of Nintendo Power. Obviously I couldn't have a nonprofit with the name Nintendo in it.
Right.
So hence the interactive art collection, and Art of Nintendo Power is the exhibit.
Okay.
So
yeah.
But this is excellent SEO, right? Excellent SEO. If you Google Nintendo Power art, I sort higher than Nintendo does. So which is also it's people talking again to strategy, right? That's part of it, right? I have intentionally made myself obnoxiously easy to find. And that's worked out for me on many occasions where people would approach me with pieces that I was interested in. Yeah.
Wow.
Because they have this art that they did when it's almost exclusively artists or like ex-Nintendo employees, but they have this stuff that this piece of art from Nintendo Power that they don't know what to do with. What do they type into Google? Nintendo Power art. There I am. So that's definitely worked in my favor as well. But yeah, so all of my social stuff, Instagram is Art of Nintendo Power with underscores in it, and then Twitter is Art of NP, but and YouTube is Art of Nintendo Power. But you essentially, if you just Google Art of Nintendo Power, like I said, you'll
come
find
up.
Yeah, you'll
just like everybody else.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask you also is like, and you don't have to go into an extreme amount of detail with this, just share as much as you want to share, but
Sure.
what was the most difficult piece for you to acquire?
Difficult? Like they're all like, again, when you're talking about one of one, there have been a lot of pieces where it was just like, most of it's waiting, right? When you're talking about difficulty, it's just waiting. Sometimes you'll find somebody, they'll have something and they're just not ready to part with it, right? There's still, you know, I'm tracking in my head a number of art pieces that I know where they are and I know who has them, and it's and sometimes it's I have a box in the garage somewhere, and if I find that box, then I'll send it to you. And that's actually how I got one of my Nintendo World Championship cartridges. I had said, you know, the guy had said, you know, again, I asked about the box, right? The box when you left Nintendo, and he did have that box, and he had no idea where it was, and he said, you know, someday if I find it, then you can have it. And I mean, we worked out I didn't fleece the guy, but it was one of those things where I didn't hear from him for, I don't know, a year or more, and I hadn't even thought about him. And then he's like, haha, I found the box. I was like, holy shit. So when you talk about like difficulty, generally it's just a waiting game more than anything, because I also do have like very strong ethical guidelines that I give myself in this kind of stuff, because I want to make sure that like my mission when I reach out to someone or when we are interacting for anything, is not to come away with the object. That is not the strategy. My object is to make sure they have a good time, make sure that they believe I am the right home on whatever timeline that they so choose. It has nothing. I don't care if I walk away with the object. It's all about making sure. My goal is to make sure that whenever they decide that they want to part with the thing, that I am the first person they think of. That is it, right? And then the rest of it will work itself out. So really, it's patience more than difficulty sometimes, because how else would it be difficult? Okay, like some negotiation, right? Okay, but that's not terribly difficult. That's just throwing money at them until they break, right? That's not that's not hard. But it's yeah. So you do need a lot of patience. There's certainly, you know, tactics involved sometimes, and it's even like difficult for me to use words like that, because again, that's really never my motivation. You know, like I have certainly, you know, come away from this experience with like lifelong friends that like my motivation was never anything in their collection, but a lot of the stuff that you would think was like the real like, holy shit, how did you find that stuff? Most of that was people coming to me. The track and field shoes. I have the shoes from issue 3. They're just Converse that had shit stuck on them. But those literally walked up to me at a convention. I was actually at Portland Retro Gaming Expo. I had that museum exhibit, and there was another vendor there that had those shoes, and he was just like, "Would you be interested?" Hell yes, I'd be interested. So like, I guess it's mostly, honestly, if I could say, like, you know, it's almost all about putting myself in the optimal position for things to happen to me, right? Which on the outside looks a lot like luck, but is very seldom that, right? Like yes, like again, sometimes they do truly, like, things will, you know, I will stumble upon things, or someone will approach me with something, but like that wasn't no effort from me. That was a shitload of effort from me. That was me making sure that when you Google Art of Nintendo Power, you find me before Nintendo, right? Like that was a lot of work. So it's that's the kind of things, like when I think of like, oh, what's difficult, it was getting myself maneuvering myself into a position in which I am in the basically setting up myself for success as much as I can.
So you're saying like most things kind of end up falling into your lap because of
Now they do,
getting
yeah.
yourself out there.
Yeah.
There
was a lot of hunting every day for a long time to make that happen, right? That was like literally, if your name, like 100%, I'm not like, if your name appears in Nintendo Power, I've either talked to you or I cannot find you. That's
man.
so like that's the level of like canvassing I've done. And then there's a whole lot of people that spidered out from that. Again, like people who were not credited. Like there are two artists who are credited by name as a cover artist in Nintendo Power Magazine.
Wow.
2 out of all of that art. 2 of them. The rest of them were credited by their agency. And so like that was a goddamn nightmare. Like trying to go from, another important takeaway. One of those 2 are currently deceased. So like that was rough. And I ended up actually finding his family, finding his estate, and I was able to rescue a lot of pieces. It was Dan McGowan, and he painted a lot of the early covers. So his first cover was the first Ninja Turtles cover. That was real early. It was like issue 5 or 6, and 7. I think it's 7. So yep, I was able to through just like finding someone who knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who finally knew his widow, right? That's the kind of progression for that stuff. So today, yes, like a lot of things fall into my lap, but that was after a couple years of just hunting like literally every day. And again, this was like when I had the time for this, because this was when like my wife was in like the late stages of cancer, and so there was just a lot of me sitting quietly by myself or sitting quietly by her side, and I would just have that time to send out 300 emails every day, like that's so when I had the time and the capacity to be able to put in that work, that's when I put that in. Now that she's gone and I have my daughter and a career and all this stuff, like I have much less time. So I am fortunate that that I did kind of go the way that all went the way that it did.
Have there ever been, I'm sure there have been, like specific items that you set out to find, or is it just anything that you could find related to Nintendo Power art?
I generally cast as wide a net as I can, because again, a lot of times it is like, oh yeah, no, I don't have this thing you're looking for, but I have these other 12 things that you had no idea existed. That's like, because that's why it's difficult for me to talk about, like, oh, people are always asking like, what is my grail piece? And I always say that it's the next thing. Like my grail piece is the thing that right now I don't know exists, and tomorrow I'm going to find it.
That thing that you don't know about that is just going to blow your socks off once you do find it.
Yeah. The Wily ship from the Mega Man 2 cover.
Oh, man.
Why does that exist? There is no reason why that should exist, and it's sitting in my living room right now. That kind of ridiculous stuff. It's funny because like oftentimes, and I think this is true with everything, is that you find it as soon as you stop looking for it.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. So the Aladdin cover, I have the Aladdin cover. And so I think issue, I want to say 67. I'm probably wrong. But 55. God. Anyway, the Aladdin cover for Super Nintendo. I worked for Disney Interactive. I worked for that company for 9 years, right? So I thought, hey, I'm in a pretty like good position to be able to find this thing, right? And so I was like, I'm going to make a concerted effort to find this piece. I'm sure it was done by a Disney artist. Spoiler alert, it was not. And so I was just like, I hit all my contacts at Disney. I was like, I'm gonna fucking find this thing, come hell or high water. After about I don't know, probably a good like 6 months of like really looking like every day. I couldn't find it. I was like, you know what? It's fine. I'll just I don't need it. It's fine. It's one of my favorite covers, but it'll be okay. And I was like, I was just like, I just resigned myself that I was not going to find this thing. Literally the next week, I stumbled across this artist who had done, what was the other cover that he had done? He what was it that he also did? There was another cover that he had did that I found, and I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I'm like always in collecting, by the way, anyone who's listening, in collecting anything, you always ask what else they have. That's like the magic word.
Yeah.
You know, the magic phrase is ask, you know, what else you got. So I bought this one cover from him, and I'm like, okay, well, what else do you have? And lo and behold, he pulls out the Aladdin cover.
Man,
this guy is not a Disney artist, and again, I'm referring to him this way because he's asked not to be named. But he was not a Disney artist. He really draws on model, like he is really good at drawing Disney characters. But he did not. Oh, Darkwing Duck. He drew the Darkwing Duck cover.
Okay.
And
Wow.
that's what I had actually bought from him. And so yeah, he pulls out the Aladdin cover. And so this thing that I had tried to look for 6 months and couldn't find, and then as soon as I stopped looking for it, I found it. That I guess you could call that hard, or that, you know, that being a difficult cover. But yeah, so stories like that make it so that I try not to even think like that. Like if I try to find the person, right? And really it's until you get to the point where you can like really visualize someone's art style, like, oh, I know that I can look at that art piece and know that person drew that. It's really just go try to find people. And if you can find people, see what they have. And oftentimes it'll surprise you, like, oh, I didn't know you drew that, or I didn't know you drew that, right? So that's really been my strategy, not less of I'm going to try to find this particular piece, and more of just like, oh, I wonder if I can find that person, or if I wonder if I can find this person that's listed in the credits, or this figure out. It's really more hunting people than it is hunting art.
Sure.
Yeah.
So for me, like one of the most fascinating, besides collecting one-of-a-kind things, is the art aspect. I am an artist myself, and I've always been drawn to art, and it's just the techniques and the styles, and being able to identify the artist who created the specific painting or drawing or whatever model. But that's been a big, huge motivating factor to me with collecting what I collect. I just enjoy looking at the artwork on the boxes and stuff. So I guess my question to you is, are you an artist yourself, or no, not at all?
No. Not in the least. I am by trade. I am a producer in the game industry, and essentially, producers are force multipliers. They allow very talented people to be very talented. So I have always appreciated talent, and but I am not an artist myself. I have helped very talented artists do their best work, in many different ways, be that, get them the budget they need, or the time they need, or the scope they need, or whatever, clearing their roadblocks. Like, I am a servant in all of in my professional aspect. It's not, I'm not, none of the people who work for me, for instance, actually report to me, except for like the other producers on my team. But like, and maybe this kind of factors into sort of my ability to talk to people, is that my whole profession is around getting people who don't report to me to do what I want them to do, essentially, like, or do what that's a very shitty way to say that, to do what's best for the product. Right. Like, cause that's my goal, is to make the best, everybody's goal, make the best game we can. Right. So like getting a team of people who none of which owe you anything, to do what's in the best interest of the product. And so that's a lot of trust. That's a lot of, that's a lot of soft skills. That's a lot of, like knowing how to talk to people. And yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say, or I'd be lying if I said that I didn't apply that skill set into everything else that I do, including the art collection.
Well, I mean, that is a unique skill to have, especially when you're going after something that's as difficult as what you are going after to acquire. Especially when you're dealing with artists and things like that. Like for me, I'm a very introverted person. I don't feel comfortable talking to people usually, so it's like I enjoy talking to people very much, but it's initiating that conversation. It's always really difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so having the skills to be able to do that is really pretty admirable as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's probably like maybe that's sort of why I don't identify that aspect of doing this as being the difficulty. I imagine many people would look at that and say, wow, that's really hard. And not to toot my own horn, but like that's probably why I have difficulty saying like, oh, like this is the hard part of doing this, because the hard part is something that comes very natural to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, like basically, I assume you have to do a lot of cold calling and cold emailing and things like that.
Yeah, especially and I honestly don't like talking on the phone. I think it's awful. Like texting, like my personal hell is talking to someone over the phone. And I don't know what it is. Like put a camera in front of me and I'm fine. I like this just fine. What we're doing now. But because I think there's more of a personal connection. I don't know why I hate the phone, but I've always hated the phone. Texting was the best invention for me ever.
Yeah, I would agree.
But when you're dealing with, people who were painting 30, 40 years ago, a lot of those people don't have email. A lot of those people that aren't adept at it. And sometimes I do have to call people on the phone and I hate it so much.
So do you have to travel to get these pieces?
Sometimes.
Like cross country or anything like that?
Yeah, sometimes. Usually it comes down to me whether or not I am comfortable shipping something.
Okay.
Like all the like physical models that I have, I didn't ship any of those. That made me super, super nervous. I talked about Dan McGowan's cover art. I have 7 or 8 pieces of his now.
Wow.
And I went and part of that too was to like, really kind of form a bond with his family. And like, again, it's so much of this is about making them understand that I am the best home for this work.
Absolutely.
And so it behooved me to fly out to them and spend a weekend with them and, and really sort of kind of lay bare my soul to them. So yeah, there is travel. But usually it's at my behest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that you just finished a convention where you showed your collection publicly, I think for the first time. Is that correct?
Yep.
So with that, how do you manage to get all of these one-of-a-kind pieces transported to, because there's a lot, and that seems like it's going to be like, it would be nerve-wracking to me, especially. I don't want anything to break, especially those 3D models and things like that. Like, was that a factor that may like hold you back from doing it? Like, that would be something that I would be just too terrified to try.
It's not it does hold me back, but that's not why. Mostly the reason why I'm not out at shows more often, and this is sort of one of the reasons why I built the nonprofit, is so that I could like take donations, for instance, to be able to like afford travel. The art collection is totally self-funded. It's all out of my paycheck that I buy all this art. And so like I try every time I like spend money on something that isn't a piece of art, that's like the check in my head. Like, all right, if I spend this money today and I find something that I really want tomorrow, am I going to be okay with not being able to afford it or putting it on a credit card or whatever? So
that's a question all collectors ask, I think.
Right. So it's but it's worse for me, I think because when I am saying no, I'm not going to buy something, every single time, whatever that thing is, it's the only one. So if sometimes I can like come to a deal, or like, a layaway or like whatever. A couple of times I've had to do that. Things that are a little bit higher in price. But yeah, so I tend to try to put myself in a position where I never need to say no. And so that's what's been kind of preventing a lot more shows, because I have so far had to essentially self-fund any of this. I can't monetize the art collection because it's Nintendo's IP. So and anyone who's been in this hobby for more than a day knows how litigious they can be. So I tend to steer clear. That's why, again, the name of the nonprofit has nothing to do with Nintendo. That's why I don't do an art book, or I don't do prints, and I don't do t-shirts. And this t-shirt is literally the only one of this that exists. It's so that I can wear it so people know to talk to me when I'm doing a museum exhibits. You cannot buy this shirt. And so so it's really, this whole thing is just me hemorrhaging money. And so that kind of curtail, because a lot of these shows, especially like smaller shows or shows that are further away, can't necessarily afford, because I don't charge anything. Again, going back to me not monetizing the collection, I don't charge anything for my displays, but I do ask that the show reimburses me for getting me there, right? So like essentially like a van rental and that kind of thing. So like those are the kinds of challenges. As far as like being afraid of moving the stuff, this is what I tell myself anyway, is that, I, again, don't ever want to be this kind of person who just like sits in my cave safe with my collection and stares at it all by myself, right? Like my purpose in doing all this is to share it. And so let's say something does happen to a piece. I would rather have something happen to it in the service of sharing the collection than to have that thing perfectly well protected in my basement for the next 30 years, right? Same thing people ask about lights, right? Like, yes, the more that I put LED is not perfect. It's definitely healthier for art to be under LED light, but it's not foolproof, right? It doesn't, all light damages everything, right? Like light is just a damaging thing. And like some convention centers don't use LEDs, they use fluorescents or like whatever, right? Shop lights. So I can't always control the lighting, and people are like, oh my God, the art collectors, especially like my high-end art collector friends, clutch their pearls because like their art stays in a closet that's pitch black, a literal closet that's pitch black, and it never comes out because that way it's preserved. And so
what's the point in preserving something if you
what
can't
is
share
the
it?
point? Exactly. Yeah. What is the point? So I am a little less risk averse. Circling back to your original question, I am a little less risk averse if it's in the service of sharing it with the world, right? And if something happens, well, that fucking sucks, but at least 1 million people got to see it, and we've got a bunch of, it's like, especially with like most of my art is scanned. I have this big freaking giant monster right here that I use the Epson Expression 10,000, by the way. This is actually an amazing scanner, but I have 99% of the collection scanned. So from a preservation aspect, it's preserved well enough for like the digital age we all live in, right? Yeah. And so honestly, most of these people who are bitching are just like scared to lose monetarily. That's the thing. They don't want something to happen to their painting because they paid a bunch of money for it, and they don't want to lose their investment.
And at that point, are you even appreciating it?
Right. Then again, going back to why I'm so selfish, because I know I have the right intentions. I can't necessarily guarantee that you do, or, and not to say that like investment, whatever, collect how you want to collect. I don't care. But for me, it's worth it to sort of be a little less risk averse, to be able to accomplish my goals with the art, which is just getting it in front of people.
So, I mean, I guess that kind of, goes into my follow-up question to that. I think you pretty much answered it. Like, how do you protect it? And can you even really insure something that's one of a kind?
Yeah. Art is easier than video games, honestly.
Okay.
Insurance companies don't care that it's video game art. They just care that it's art. And essentially you just have to get it appraised, which like any auction house will do. I appraised a lot of the stuff through Heritage, for instance. So the art was actually much easier to insure than anything else, like any of the actual
That's
video games, especially now, because overnight, if anybody is, unless you've been living under a rock in this hobby, you are at least aware of what the high-end sealed market is doing right now.
Right.
And like overnight, N64 games are worth over $1 million. I'll tell you, insurance companies don't believe that shit is happening. So they, they're fine insuring a Mickey Mantle rookie card. They are not going to insure your Mario 64 for $1.5 million. I promise you.
Wow.
So those are the kind of issues that I have, or issues people have with insuring. I'm a little bit different. Again, I am an actual museum. Despite that it's just me, I am legally a museum. So I can insure that way, and it's a little bit, this is different stuff. But then as far as like physically insuring or physically protecting it, you just do what you can. Everything, I have dehumidifiers in the house. Everything is under museum acrylic. So it's, whatever, 98% UV protected, and
okay,
et cetera. But and everything's double matted, so it's actually physically removed from the glass by like a quarter of an inch. And it looks pretty. Double matting is awesome. But and it actually ended up, as as part of my logo for the foundation.
That was the biggest inspiration for the logo, for sure.
Yeah, I double mat everything. Actually, sometimes I even more than that, like my Ninja Turtle stuff, just because I thought it would be funny, has 4 mats in it, so it's all the colors of the Ninja Turtles.
That's a great idea.
Which is actually, we were like, why is the art so far away from the glass? 4 mats.
Well, I mean, double matting, coming from the art world, double matting was a thing that was used a lot, especially back in the 90s. But I think a lot of people have gotten away from that. And that's something that stands out to me with your art, especially using the 2 different colors of mats it frames it really well. I like the way you've done
also, some people don't notice this. Actually, most people don't notice this, but like all of my covers are actually framed with the same colors of double matting.
Yeah.
And that's so that when I have them on display. So here's the thing, like a lot of like that frame back there, with all the envelopes in it, by virtue of like how many openings that thing is, that frame is gigantic. But it's like I have a lot of these like interior spreads that I have like 20 openings or like whatever, like these gigantic like 4 or 5 foot frames. But those aren't necessarily the ones that I want to prioritize. And for a lot of these covers, they're very small in comparison to those large frames. So I matted them all the same color so that when I put them together, your eye is drawn to all of the same color and not necessarily worried about the physical size of the painting.
No, it does a very designer way of thinking. That's the same approach that I take with any of my designs. It's just keeping everything together, at least with the colors, is just helps it's more visual pleasing and easier to look at. So that's cool. Well, JJ, do you have any other questions for Stephan?
I talk a lot.
Yeah, no, you're good. No, you answered like a lot of the stuff that we had planned in advance. I honestly not so much a question, just more of a kind of a statement, and quite frankly a thank you, really. So I will be totally and brutally honest with you. Before Adrian mentioned you and what he was doing with the logo and everything like that, I knew nothing about what you were doing. I had never even heard of the Collector's Quest or like any of this stuff at all.
How dare you?
I know. I'm a jerk. But as soon as he told me and what it was and what you did and everything, I immediately started, looking online and going through it. And I realized like So I am currently like in the process, very long process. I have been for like the past like 2 years, trying to just collect every issue of Nintendo Power, because I love the cover art. That is like, to me, I'm missing like maybe like 40, 50 issues at this point before I have a complete set. But that to me,
Is it all the
like,
GameCube stuff? I find that
it is mostly GameCube stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Because I also don't want to pay like insane prices for the stuff that they have on eBay too, because some of them are way more than I
also
want.
like arguably, like as far as like popularity at the time, like Nintendo was in a slump.
Yeah.
GameCube wasn't doing tremendously well, and so the subscriber base was lower. So not only do like fewer people have them, and there were less subscribers to the magazine, but then they printed fewer of them. So like honestly, as far as like people are like, oh, Nintendo Power #1 is so rare. It is not rare.
No, it's really easy. I was impressed by how easy it was to get like the first like 100.
3.8 million copies. 3.8
Yep.
million
For
copies
a first
of that
edition, our first copy of the magazine. That's
yes,
crazy.
3.8 million copies. But the GameCube run, there's by comparison, there's not very many of them.
It's exactly what I'm missing.
Yeah.
But the main reason I started collecting was because, like I said, the cover art and everything. There's something about Nintendo aesthetics in general. Like, I have no interest in collecting like GamePro or any of the other gaming magazines and stuff like that. They were cool to read back in the day, but there's just something about Nintendo Power covers that when you saw it in a store, you were like, oh my gosh, there's a new game coming out, or oh my gosh, I played that and look at this. Like you mentioned the Ninja Turtle cover earlier today. I love the which one is it? The one with the dragon from Secret of Mana on the front.
Cried when I found
love that one. Oh, it's gorgeous.
That's Dan McGowan.
Really? Oh, man, it's so great. I could literally just like, it's like reliving those days of like seeing these games when they came out and going through one by one, getting to just pull out these issues and look at them. I had my friends over earlier tonight, and I had mentioned that I was going to be doing this later on. And my friend's wife was like, "Oh, I used to love those Nintendo Powers. Like, I really like the cover art and stuff." And she started naming off a couple. I was like, "Well, you want to see them? I've got those downstairs." Went downstairs. She immediately starts pulling them out, just looking at them on the table,
tearing out posters.
Right. She did ask me if I still had them. I was like, yeah, most of them do still have them in there. But what you've essentially done is you have made it a way to where like people who aren't able to get their hands on like a complete run or find copies of this nostalgia, these beautiful pieces of art, they can just come to like, when you start. I know you finally started being able to like display a lot of this stuff, and you recently did that.
Also all over my Twitter, by the way. If you ever want to like just troll my Twitter, you can find tons of stuff.
You've given people a way to do that without having to worry about buying, all these magazines and stuff like that. Not that I'm trying to discourage people from buying them, because I think collecting these things is so cool. They're great. And even like, flipping them open and just reading the old articles and stuff is a blast. I
like the old ads.
Myself. Yeah, absolutely. You've literally given people a way to relive their nostalgia and watch Nintendo grow up from when it started with the NES, up until, the Wii and stuff like that. And it just, I like, seriously, I think that's just so amazing that you were able to pull that off in such a way that like really shows that these pieces need to be appreciated, and that more people really need to look at this. And I seriously, I love what you're doing. It's amazing. And I've been following you ever since Adrian mentioned you. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. I love putting like an adult lens on like a piece of like childhood media, like
Absolutely.
being able to like be like, no, this is like actual art, like we're not fucking around.
100%.
This is genuine art, right? Like anything else. And so to be able to do that, to a publication that, let's face it, was like an ad machine. I mean, not physically. First 10 years of Nintendo Powers had no ads, but it was a vehicle in which to get children to buy more games. The whole idea was that the magazine would help you finish games so that you would go buy more games. And same thing with the gameplay counselors. That's why they never charged anything. I mean, it was a local call, so you'd get long distance charges, but like Nintendo wasn't monetizing. Like there was no charge coming from Nintendo for gameplay counselors.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was just a local Seattle call, which is why actually they would get tons of like Seattle kids calling them, because like back then like nobody's parents were gamers, right? And so like
Mhm.
nobody knew any adults that spoke our language.
Mm.
And so except for these people. And so they would just call the hotline just to talk to an adult who understood what they were talking about.
That's awesome.
And so it wouldn't even necessarily be like a question. It would be like, can we just talk about Mario 3? Because it's fucking awesome. So yeah, but yeah, that's kind of my, one of my favorite things about having done all this is I find myself a little bit of an energy vampire. I definitely like get a huge satisfaction out of like seeing that look on people's faces when they walk into that room for the first time. And just like, and what's interesting about the magazine too is that like there is like a nostalgia for the magazine that lives completely separate from any of the content from any of the games, right? Like for instance me, that Darkwing Duck cover, I never owned Darkwing Duck. I didn't play that game until I was an adult. Like it was, on an emulator. I have no nostalgic connection for that that game. I viscerally remember pulling that issue out of my mailbox. Like, so that I have this huge nostalgic tie to that issue of the magazine, despite the fact that I could not care less about that game.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think it's so been so interesting is like people don't love, like people walk into an installation and they're not awestruck by like, oh, like I played this game as much as like I remember reading the magazine. I remember like it's the magazine, despite the fact that it's an amalgamation of so many different intellectual properties. It's really got a like a cultural significance of its own, completely separate from anything else.
You're so true. I mean, when I think back to my past, like I remember specific magazine covers that stood out to me, like Metroid on Nintendo Power. The Metroid cover was very memorable to me. Also, different magazine, Game Pro, the Earthworm Jim cover on that magazine. I saw that in a Blockbuster video, and I didn't even care about renting a game at that point. I just wanted to flip through that magazine. And it was in a plastic sleeve, and I remember that because you couldn't even flip through it in the store. So I bought that magazine instead and brought it home, and I went through that magazine so many times. Like it's just, I have more nostalgia for the art and the consuming of video game related media, and not so much playing the game itself. And that is that's a huge driving factor for me and collecting. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, even when I did own fucking every game every game in the universe, I still only played the same like 5 games.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and also with like collecting stuff related to basically a dying medium. I mean, magazines are still around, but they're slowly going away. I part of my job is we do a monthly magazine that gets mailed out to the homes in the town I live in. And so I get to put together this magazine every month, and I love doing it. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. And to know that, we're hanging on pretty well, but I mean, there's going to be a time when, that print media is probably not going to be as desirable or profitable, and we're not going to be able to continue doing it.
Well, and even then, like modern magazines are not made anywhere similarly to the way that, Nintendo Power was made, which is why I love, like, I have the map for the overworld map for Dragon Warrior, which was a pull-out poster, and it was actually a pack-in for the actual game, but it was a pull-out poster in Nintendo Power, and that is upwards of 500 Polaroids that are being cut up and then pasted together.
Wow.
The artist estimated it took her around 200 hours to do.
Oh my gosh.
And it was literally just her taking a photograph of a television over and over and over and over and over. Which all of those maps are like that. Like that's why if you look at it like Mega Man, any of those Mega Man maps, for instance, every inch you'll see Mega Man somewhere because they're just taking a picture of the screen.
That is so interesting. I always wondered how they did that. That is wow. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. But so I love pieces like that because they show process, right?
Yeah.
I love being able to show process, which is why I love, like, I have all those Howard and Nestor faxes, and I have, letters and invoices and just all sorts of, just like, this is how this was put together. I've got, pencil roughs for airbrush pieces that I can show then, like, okay, this is the pencil drawing and this is the finished piece, and like being able to actually show that process has been, genuinely important, because like you said, that craft is dead. Like, no
Right.
one makes magazines that way anymore. And print media in general is dying, right? Same thing with the gameplay counselor stuff. I get, when I put on that Portland display, I had, obviously littler kids, but they're just like genuinely didn't understand the need for the gameplay counselors when they just had Google. They're like, why didn't they just Google it? Why didn't they just Google it in 1988? Right? Like, there's like this cultural, like, divide where they just don't
They
understand,
don't
like,
get it.
pre-internet, right? Or just like understanding what a call center is, like, at a baseline.
Yeah.
And like, there's this, like, huge, because counselors, that profession was literally decimated by the internet almost overnight.
Yeah.
Like, there was a short period in which they were doing sort of like a transitional period where they were like also like staffing Nintendo, or like the AOL portal for Nintendo.
Ah.
But that was gone real fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just so much about, that's why I've sort of gravitate to these little, like, kind of niches of the industry space that kind of don't exist anymore, or just like not well documented and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I go and I find that stuff and I show it to people.
I called Nintendo Power, the counselors, twice, and I remember both phone calls specifically. The first one was for Final Fantasy Adventure on Game Boy, because I couldn't figure out something with palm trees and you had to do figure eights around them. I couldn't figure out what to do there. That was like a 30-second phone call. The guy knew right away, and just that was it.
Sure. Yep.
The second time, which was the last time I ever called him because I got my ass reamed, was I was playing Final Fantasy 3 on Super Nintendo, and was trying to find every character in the world of Ruin. So I sat on the phone for a good 20-25 minutes while the money was just racking up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how mad did your parents get?
Oh yeah, I was never able to call them again. So
Those counselors, man, I will say, like, yes, they did have, guidebooks, and they actually used Nintendo Power as a resource too. Spoiler alert. A lot of those times you're calling, they're just opening the same resource you could subscribe to. But yeah, I have this one clip of a counselor answering a question, like, about Final Fantasy, like X amount of hours into Final Fantasy, right? While they're playing Duck Hunt. And like that, just like,
that's crazy.
That level of mastery, not just like playing another game, but like that level of distracted, like playing Duck Hunt while you're like, oh yeah, I know exactly where you are, like X amount of hours into this Japanese RPG. And yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. Well, Stephan, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you joining us today on this episode. And I learned a lot. I could listen to you talk about this stuff forever. I could talk about it forever.
So there you go. I'm happy to come back.
Oh yeah, anytime. We're gonna have to,
for sure.
We're gonna have to get some really some banger questions for you. If we can get you back.
Like I said, this was I had a lot of fun. I do talk about it a lot, right? But no, this was great.
I like reminiscing a little bit, with the nostalgia, because there's not a lot of people who are into this stuff, and it's difficult, at least in my circle. I don't know a lot of people other than JJ that we can just talk about this stuff. So it's always fun.
Nintendo Power is one of those things, though. I mean, because everybody loved their Nintendo growing up. It's one of those things where you can pick out a cover of just one game, like Super Mario Brothers 3 or something like that. Show it to somebody, just put it in front of them, even if they're not a gamer, and their face will light up automatically because they remember their memories with that game specifically. I love what it does.
It was such a special aesthetic too. Like my girlfriend does not care about the magazine at all. I mean, she absolutely supports me and like is very proud of me and is at every show, and like she's so like no problems there. But like as far as just like caring about the physical magazine itself, doesn't care. But she so has no nostalgic connection, but she really loves the aesthetic. And so like she actually has she took it, you know, because as I frame stuff, I usually like frame stuff with whatever page or whatever cover. So like I tear apart Nintendo Powers. Sorry, I tear apart Nintendo Powers pretty regularly, and so so I had
no
like
GameCube ones. I'm just
I
saying.
have a set no. Well, they weren't doing original art by the time that they were at GameCube. But so I had a stack of like donors, right? And so she pulled out a bunch of posters and she like hung them up on her wall, like in like outside of her bedroom at her house. Like she's never before meeting me, she's never opened an issue of Nintendo Power in her life.
That's hilarious.
But she loves the aesthetic enough that she's got a bunch of Nintendo Power posters in her hallway. And but the thing I always loved about the aesthetic too, and I don't think I could have articulated this at the time, but like looking back at it as an adult, is that because it was so they needed so much art, and so there were like in-house Nintendo Power artists, and then there was the Japanese contractors, and then there was like American contractors as well. You had so many sources of art going into the same publication that the aesthetic was fucking bonkers. And I guess I just realized I never asked if we could curse, so I apologize if you have to like bleep me out.
No, you're fine.
You're totally fine.
But it always looked like to me as a kid something that my friends and I could have made. Right? Like just from like purely an aesthetic value, like every page is drastically different in aesthetic than every other page. Even sometimes like on the same page, they would have like multiple, because again, they needed a tremendous amount of art. So they had a lot of different artists drawing very quickly. And so you have sort of the, you know, like I love every piece of art. In a vacuum, not all of it is good. But they used it anyway. I have a spy versus spy piece that was drawn in crayon, and it went in the fucking magazine.
Really?
So yeah. And so like it was up to the artist to pick whatever medium they wanted.
I loved that game.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the publication was such just an amalgam of style but that's what
sure.
gave it like its complete lack of art direction. Gail, if you're listening, I'm sorry. Their complete lack of art direction was its aesthetic. It's what made it feel like it did, because it was just completely out of control from page to page. Like there was no, and that's what like a lot of, you know, I'm sorry to any of my friends who are currently in, you know, in the magazine trade, but like it all feels very samey now. I mean, games have the same problem too, right? You can, if you looked at a screenshot of a PS5 game versus you know, an Xbox game, it looked like the same goddamn game. You know, everything is very samey now, right?
Yeah.
And so, but Nintendo Power, every page was just wildly different than any other page. And it was just such a charming aesthetic, and that's what it made it feel like it was something that like my friends and I made, right? That it made you, it was part of what made you feel like that magazine really was for you as a kid.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And like kind of leaning off of that with the nostalgia that people have, and I'm sorry, I had another question come up when you were talking about that, but
I like how we wrapped and then we're like, what about this?
When you displayed your art at the last convention, it must have been immensely satisfying to have people walk up and say, I remember this. This was my favorite magazine, knowing that
Energy
you have
Vampire.
this piece. And man.
Give me all of your energy.
Yeah. I would totally feed off of that. And just, I know you had to have been just enjoying the hell out of that. Yeah. That's cool. But yeah, I mean, just knowing that you have a piece of nostalgia that is so special to so many people all over, it's incredible. So.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Unless anybody has anything else to add, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up.
Are there other
Thank
people?
you so much.
Other
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
Thank you for real. This has been a
absolutely.
blast.
My pleasure. Yeah, my
Yes.
pleasure. This is great.
And we would love to have you again sometime.
Anytime.
It's great conversation.
I'll never say
Anyway,
no.
if you want to find Stephan, we'll post the links down below, but it's Art of NP on Twitter, art_of_Nintendo_power on Instagram.
Yep.
And then we've got Art of Nintendo Power on YouTube. Your
Yep.
YouTube channel is great, by the way, too. You need to check
Thank
that
you.
out.
I wish I had more time.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of the content that I do make for it, but I just don't, I don't have it.
I love the video of the mask, the Castlevania mask. That was so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And also you're on the Collector's Quest podcast.
Yep. 1/3 of the Collector's Quest podcast. SoundCloud is, I think, our baseline for that. So I think if you want to find us, you can find us most regularly on SoundCloud. I think we are on most of the podcasting things.
You are.
Stitcher,
you
I
are.
can confirm. That's where I listen to it.
It's Tyler's job to worry about that stuff.
Great podcast too, by the way. I'm a long time listener. I've been listening since since almost when it started, when it was just Johnny and Kat.
I hope that I bring some different perspective, because clearly, like, especially now, I don't really collect games anymore. But I'm still on a podcast about collecting games.
You did though, and you have so much to offer the conversation that it's you've been absent from a few shows, and I've missed you. Just must say.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. Like I said, it's finding the time. It's not for lack of love. It's just finding the time.
Well, and I'm so glad that you found time to join us today.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
again, thank you.
Definitely.
As for us, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, as JJ likes to say.
He did it.
Yeah. I am at Bertazoid on Twitter. JJ is at JJ Santaniello, and I'm not going to spell it because he doesn't spell it. But
link in the video. Just go to the video.
There you go.
I spell it like once every 4 months. That's good enough. All right, we're good.
All right.
Follow me anyways. What does it matter?
As always, on game.